Hello and welcome to this webinar entitled Data Protection Clauses in Commercial Contracts, the Key Issues Explored with me, Keith Markham. As always, let's begin by having a look at the agenda. So we've got quite a lot of things to talk about. We'll begin by talking about different types of contract which may contain these clauses. We'll see in particular that there are three possible permutations that you need to think about. You may be engaging in a contract controller to controller. You may be engaged in a contract controller to processor, or you may be engaged in a contract between joint controllers. And we will briefly have a look at the analysis of those three possibilities before we then proceed to talk about what is required to be included in those cases. After that, having established we've got those different types and what might be required, we'll move on to talk about basic provisions that will typically apply in any of those three type of scenarios. So we'll look at how we deal with definitions that we find in the legislation. We'll look at how we define the status of the parties to the contract. And we'll also look at issues of general compliance with applicable legislation and think about how we might reflect that in practice. Then we will go on to spend a good chunk of time talking about controller to processor agreements because they have certain specific mandatory content. And a lot of that mandatory content, frankly, can also be used in other contexts as well. But we'll sort of follow the spine of the mandatory content, and then we'll think about one or two other things we can have as well as that. Once we've done that, we'll go on to then talk about joint controllers and see there is some mandatory content there, but it's not as extensive as it is in the case of the controller to processor agreement. And then finally, we'll look at issues around non-compliance and indemnities. So in this particular case, we will look at the respective liabilities of controllers and processors. We'll think about various alternative wording that could be inserted if you want to protect yourself using some form of indemnity.